Hi, it's Rick. Welcome to the Campfire. This is the first part of a long bedtime story about the daughter of a foolish farmer turned pirate and the men who try to win her heart. Before we begin our story, I want you to take a deep breath in. Hold it for a few seconds. Now slowly exhale. As you exhale, let the tension and worries of the day flow out of you. Now imagine yourself standing outside of a cozy cabin by the edge of a peaceful lake. You can hear the sound of birds chirping, owls hooting, the rustling of the leaves in the wind. As you look around, you notice a small campfire burning nearby. You can see the flames dancing and flickering, casting a warm glow on the surrounding area. You can smell the wood smoke and hear the crackling of the fire. You decide to walk over to the campfire and take a seat on a comfortable log nearby. You feel the warmth of the fire on your skin and hear the sound of the flames. Take another deep breath in. Hold it. Slowly let it out, feeling yourself completely relax. As you sit there on your comfortable log, you can feel the stress and worries of your day melting away. You feel completely at ease, surrounded by the beauty and tranquility of nature. You can hear the sound of the lake lapping against the shore, and you feel completely immersed in the moment. Take one more deep breath in. Hold it. As you slowly let it out, let go of all the tension and worries and things that you've been carrying around all day. I want you to repeat that process. Now, let's start our story. The month was September, and the place was in the neighborhood of Bridgetown on the island of Barbados. The 17th century was not 17 years old, but the girl who walked slowly down to the riverbank was 3 years its senior. She carried a fishing rod and a line, and her name was Kate Bonnet. She was a bright-faced, quick-moving young person, and apparently did not expect to catch many fish, for she had no basket in which to carry her finny prizes. Nor apparently did she have any bait, except that which was on her hook, and which had been affixed there by one of the servants at her home, not far away. In fact, Mistress Kate was too nicely dressed, and her gloves were too clean to have much to do with fish or bait. But she seated herself on a little rock in a shady spot not far from the water, and threw forth her line. Then she gazed about her, a little up the river, and a good deal down the river. It was a truly pleasant scene which lay before her eyes. Not half a mile away was the bridge which gave this English settlement its name, and beyond the river were woods and cultivated fields, with here and there a little bit of smoke, for it was growing late in the afternoon, when smoke meant supper. Beyond all this, the land rose from the lower ground near the river and the sea, in terrace after terrace, until the upper stretches of its woodlands showed clear against the evening sky. But Mistress Kate Bonnet now gazed steadily down the stream, beyond the town and the bridge, and paid no more attention to the scenery than the scenery did to her, although one was quite as beautiful as the other. There was a bunch of flowers in the hat of the young girl, not a very large one and not a very small one, but of such a size as might be easily seen from the bridge had anyone happened to be crossing about at that time. And in fact, as the wearer of the hat and the white flowers still continued to gaze at the bridge. She saw someone come out upon it with a quick, buoyant step, and then she saw him stop and gaze steadily up the river. At this she turned her head, and her eyes went out over the beautiful landscape and the wide terraces rising above each other toward the sky. It's astonishing how soon after this a young man, dressed in a brown suit, and very pleasant to look upon, came rapidly walking along the riverbank. This was Master Martin Newcombe, a young Englishman not 2 years from his native land, and now a prosperous farmer on the other side of the river. It often happened that Master Newcombe, at the close of his agricultural labors, would put on a good suit of clothes and ride over the bridge to the town to attend to business or to social duties as the case might be. But sometimes, not willing to encumber himself with a horse, he walked over the bridge and strolled or hurried along the riverbank. This was one of the times in which he hurried. He had been caught by the vision of the bunch of white flowers in the hat of this girl who was seated on the rock in the shade. As Master Newcombe stepped near, his spirits rose as they had not always risen, and he approached Mistress Kate, for he perceived that, although she held the handle of her rod in her hand, the other end of it was lying on the ground, not very far away from the bait, and the hook, which was very plain, had not been in the water at all. She must have been thinking of something else entirely besides fishing, he thought. But he did not dare go on with that sort of thinking in the way he would have liked to do it. He had not too great a belief in himself, though he was very much in love with Kate Bonnet. "Is this the best time of day for fishing, Master Newcombe?" she said without rising or offering him her hand. "For my part, I don't believe it is." He smiled as he threw his hat upon the ground. "Let me put your line a little farther out." And so saying, he took the rod from her hand and stepped between her and the bait, which must have been now quite hot from lying so long in a bit of sunshine. He rearranged the bait and threw the line far out into the river. Then he gave her the rod again. He seated himself on the ground nearby. "This is the second time I've been over the bridge today," he said. "And this morning, very early, I saw for the first time your father's ship, which was lying below the town. It's a fine vessel, so far as I can judge, being a landsman." "Yes," said she, "and I have been on board of her and gone all over her, and have seen many things which are queer and strange to me. But the strangest thing about her, to my mind, being a landswoman, is that she should belong to my father. There are many things which he has not, which it would be easy to believe he would like to have, but that a ship with sails and anchors and hatchways should be one of these things, it's hard to imagine." Young Newcombe thought it was impossible to imagine, but he expressed himself discreetly. "It must be that he's going to engage in trade," he said. "Has he not told you of his intentions?" "Not much," said she. "He says he's going to cruise about among the islands, and when I asked him if he would take me, he laughed and answered that he might do so, but that I must never say a word of it to Madame Bonnet, for if she heard of it she might change his plans." The wicked young man found himself almost wishing that a somewhat bad-tempered Madame Bonnet might hear of and change any plan which might take her husband's daughter from this town, especially in a vessel, for vessels were always terribly tardy when anyone was waiting for their return. And besides, it often happened that vessels never came back at all. "I shall take a little trip with him, even if we don't go far. It would be ridiculous for my father to own a ship and for me never to sail in her." "That would not be so bad," said Master Martin, feeling that a short absence might be endured. Moreover, if a little pleasure trip were to be made, it was reasonable enough to suppose that other people, not belonging to the Bonnet family, might be asked to sail as guests. "What my father expects to trade in," she said contemplatively gazing before her, I'm sure I do not know. It can't be horses or cattle, for he has not enough of them to make such a venture profitable. And as to sugar cane, or anything from his farm, I'm sure he has a good enough market here for all he has to sell. Certainly he does not produce enough to make it necessary for him to buy a ship in order to carry them away. It is opined, said Martin, by the people of the town that Major Bonnet intends to become a commercial man, and to carry away to the other islands, and perhaps to the old country itself, the goods of other people. Now that would be fine, said Mistress Kate, her eyes sparkling. For I should surely then go with him, and we would see the world and perhaps London. And her face flushed with the prospect. Martin's face did not flush. But if your father's ship sailed on a long voyage, he said with a suspicion of apprehension, he would not sail with her. He would send her under the charge of others. The girl shook her head. When she sails, said she, he sails in her. If you had heard him talking as I have heard him, you would not doubt that. And if he sails, I sail. Martin's soul grew quite sad. There were very good reasons to believe that this dear girl might sail away from Bridgetown, and from him. She might come back to the town, but she might not come back to him. Mistress Kate, said he, looking very earnestly at her, do you know that such speech as this makes my heart sink? You know I love you. I have told you so before. If you were to sail away, I care not to what port, this world would be a black place for me. That is like a lover, she exclaimed a little pertly. It's like them all, every man of them. They must have what they want, and they must have it no matter who else may suffer. He rose and stood by her. But I don't want you to suffer, he said. Do you think it would be suffering to live with one who loved you, who would spend his whole life making you happy, who would look upon you as the chief thing in the world, and have no other ambition than to make himself worthy of you? She looked up at him with a little smile. That would doubtless be all very pleasant for you, she said. And in order that you might be pleased, you would have her give up so much. That is the way with men. Now here am I, born in the very end of the last century, and having had, consequently, no good out of that, and with but 17 years in this century, most of it passed in girlhood and in school. And now, when the world might open before me for a little, here you come along and tell me all that you would like to have, and that you would like me to give up. But you should not think, said he, and that was all he said, for at that moment Kate Bonnet felt a little jerk at the end of her line, and then a good strong pull. I have a fish, she cried, and sprang to her feet. Then, with a swoop, she threw into the midst of the weeds and wildflowers a struggling fish, which Martin hastened to take from the hook. A fine fellow, he cried, and he has arrived just in time to make a dainty dish for your supper. Ah, no, she said, winding the line about her rod. If I were to take that fish to the house, it would surely disturb Madame Bonnet. She would object to my catching it, and she would object to having prepared it for the table. She would object to having it eaten, when she had arranged that we would eat something else. No, I give it to you, Master Newcombe. I suppose in your house you can cook and eat what you please. Yes, said he, but how delightful it would be if we could eat it together. Meaning, said she, that I should never eat other fish than those from this river? No, sir, that may not be. I have a notion that the first foreign fish I shall eat will be found in the island of Jamaica, for my father said that he possibly might take the first trip there, where lives my mother's brother, whom we have not seen for a long time. But, as I told you before, nobody must know this. And now I must go to my supper, and you must take yours home with you. And I am sure it will be the sweetest fish, he said, that was ever caught in all these waters. But I beg, before you go, you will promise me one thing." "Promise you?" she said quite loftily. "Yes," he answered. "Tell me that, no matter where you go, you will not leave Bridgetown without letting me know of it?" "I will not indeed," said she. "And if it is to Jamaica we go, perhaps my father— but no, I don't believe he'll do that. He will be too much wrapped up in his ship to want for company to whom he must attend and talk." "Ah, there would be no need of that," said Master Newcombe with a lover's smile. She smiled back at him. "Good night," she said, "and see to it that you eat your fish tonight while it is so fresh." Then she ran up the winding path to her home. He stood and looked after her until she had disappeared among the shrubbery, after which he walked away. "I should have said more than I did," he reflected. "Seldom have I had such a good chance to speak and urge my case. It was that confounded ship. Her mind is all for that, and not for me." Major Sted Bonnet, the father of Kate, whose mother had died when the child was but a year old, was a middle-aged Englishman of a fair estate in the island of Barbados. He had been an officer in the army, was well educated and intelligent, and now, in vigorous middle life, had become a confirmed country gentleman. His herds and his crops were, to him, the principal things on earth, with the exception of his daughter, for, although he had married for the second time, there were a good many things which he valued more than his wife, and it had therefore occasioned a good deal of surprise and more or less small talk among his neighbors that Major Bonnet should want to buy a ship. But he had been a soldier in his youth, and soldiers are very apt to change their manner of living. And so, if Major Bonnet had grown tired of his farm and determined to go into commercial enterprises, it was not, perhaps, a very amazing thing that a military man who had turned planter should now turn to something else. Madame Bonnet had heard of the ship, although she had not been told anything about her stepdaughter taking a trip in her, and if she had heard, she might not have objected. She had regarded, in an apparently careless manner, her husband's desire to navigate the sea, for no matter to what point he might happen to sail, his ship would take him away from Barbados, and that would very well suit her. She was getting tired of Major Bonnet. She did not believe he had ever been a very good soldier. She was positively sure that he was not a good farmer, and she had the strongest kind of doubt as to his ability as a commercial man. But as this new business would free her from him, at least for a time, she was well content, and although she should feel herself somewhat handicapped by the presence of Kate, she did not intend to allow that young lady to interfere with her plans and purposes during the absence of the head of the house. So she went her way, saying nothing derisive about nautical life, except what she considered it necessary for her to do in order to maintain her superior position in the household. Major Bonnet was now very much engaged and a good deal disturbed, for he found that projected sailing, even in one's own craft, is not always smooth sailing. He was putting his vessel in excellent order, and was fitting her out generously in the way of stores and all manner of nautical needfuls, not forgetting the guns necessary for defense in these somewhat disordered times. And his latest endeavors were towards the shipping of a suitable crew. Seafaring men were not scarce in the port of Bridgetown, but Major Bonnet, now entitled to be called captain, was very particular about his crew, and it took him a long time to collect suitable men. As he was most truly a landsman, knowing nothing about the sea or the various intricate methods of navigating a vessel thereupon, he was compelled to secure a real captain, one who would be able to take charge of the vessel and crew, and who would do and have done in a thoroughly seamanlike manner what his nominal skipper should desire and ordain. This absolutely necessary personage had been secured almost as soon as the vessel had been purchased, before any of the rest of the crew had signed ship's articles, and it was under his general supervision that the storing and equipment had been carried on. His name was Sam Loftus. He was a big man with a great readiness of speech. There were perhaps some things he could not do, but there seemed to be nothing that he was not able to talk about. As had been said, the rest of the crew came in slowly, but they did come, and Major Bonnet told his daughter that when he had secured 4 more men, it was his intention to leave port. "And sail for Jamaica?" she exclaimed. "Oh, yes," he said with an affectionate smile. "And I will leave you with your Uncle Delphine, where you can stay while I make some little cruises here and there." "And so I am really to go?" she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. "Really to go," he said. "And what may I pack up?" she asked, thinking of her stepmother. "Not much," he said, "not much. We'll be able to find at Spanish Town something braver in the way of apparel than anything you now possess. It will be some days before we sail, and I have quietly conveyed on board such belongings as you need." She was very happy, and she laughed. "Yours will be an easily laden ship," she said, "for you take with you no great store of goods for traffic. But I suppose you intend to pick up your cargo among the islands where you cruise, and at a less cost, perchance, than it could be procured here?" "Yes, yes," he said. "You've hit it fairly, my little girl. You've hit it fairly." New annoyances now began to beset Major Bonnet. What his daughter had remarked in pleasantry, the people of the town began to talk about unpleasantly. Here was a good-sized craft about to set sail with little or no cargo, but with a crew apparently much larger than her requirements, but not yet large enough for the desires of her owner. To be sure, as Major Bonnet did not know anything about ships, he was bound to do something odd when he bought one and set forth to sail upon her. But there were some odd things which ought to be looked into, and there were people who advised that the attention of the colonial authorities should be drawn to this ship of their farmer townsmen. Major Bonnet had such a high reputation as a good citizen that there were few people who thought it worthwhile to trouble themselves about his new business venture. But a good many disagreeable things came to the ears of Sam Loftus, who reported them to his employer, and it was agreed between them that it would be wise for them to sail as soon as they could, even if they did not wait for the few men they had considered to be needed. Early upon a cloudy afternoon, Major Bonnet and his daughter went out in a small boat to look at his vessel, the Sarah Williams, which was then lying a short distance below the town. "Now, Kate," said the good Major Bonnet when they were on board, "I have fitted up a little room for you below, which I think you will find comfortable enough during the voyage to Jamaica. I will take you with me when I return to the house, and then you can make up a little package of clothes which it will be easy to convey to the river bank when the time shall come for you to depart. I can't now say just when that time will arrive, but it may be in the daytime or it may be at night, but it will be soon. And I will give you good notice, and I will come up the river for you in a boat. But now I am very busy, and I'll leave you to become acquainted with the Sarah Williams, which, for a few days, will be your home. I shall be obliged to row over to the town for perhaps half an hour, but Ben Greenway will be here to attend to anything you need until I return." Ben Greenway was a Scotchman who had for a long time been Major Bonnet's most trusted servant. He was a good farmer, was apt at carpenter work, and knew a good deal about masonry. A few months ago, anyone living in that region would have been likely to say, if the subject had been brought up, that without Ben Greenway, Major Bonnet could not get along at all, not even for a day, for he depended upon him in so many ways. And yet, now the master of the estate was about to depart, for nobody knew how long, and leave his faithful servant behind. The reason he gave was that Ben could not be spared from the farm. But people in general, and Ben in particular, thought this very poor reasoning. Any sort of business which made it necessary for Major Bonnet to separate himself from Ben Greenway was a very poor business, and should not be entered upon. The deck of the Sarah Williams presented a lively scene as Kate stood upon the little quarter-deck and gazed forward. The sailors were walking about and sitting about, smoking, talking, or coiling things away. There were people from the shore with baskets containing fruit and other wares for sale, and all stirring and all new, all very interesting to Miss Kate as she stood, with her ribbons flying in the river breeze. "Who is that young fellow?" she said to Ben Greenway, who was standing by her. "The one with the big basket. It seems to me I've seen him before." "Oh, he's been on the farm. That's Dickory Charter, whose father was drowned out fishing a few years ago. He's a good lad, and boards all ships comin' and goin' to sell his wares, for his mother leans on him now, having no father." The youth, who seemed to feel that he was being talked about, now walked aft and held up his basket. He was a handsome youngster, lightly clad and barefooted, and, although not yet full grown, of a strong and active build. Kate beckoned to him and bought an orange. "And how's your mother, Dickory?" said Ben. "Right well, I thank you," said he, and gazed at Kate, who was biting a hole in her orange. Then, as he turned and went away, having no reason to expect to sell anything more, Kate remarked to Ben, "That is truly a fine-looking young fellow. He walks with such strength and ease, like a deer or a cat." "That comes from not wearing shoes," said Ben. "But as for me, I'd like better to wear shoes and walk a bit more stiffly." Now there came aft a sailor who touched his cap and told Ben Greenway that he was wanted below to superintend the storing of some cases of the captain's liquors. So Kate, left to herself, began to think about what she should pack into her little bundle. She would make it very small, for the fewer things she took with her, the more she would buy at Spanish Town. But the contents of her package did not require much thought, and she soon became a little tired of staying there by herself, and therefore she was glad to see young Dickory with his orange basket walking aft. "I don't want any more oranges," she said when he was near enough, "but perhaps you may have other fruit." He came up to her and put down his basket. "I have bananas, but perhaps you don't like them?" "Oh, yes, I do," she answered. But without offering to show her the fruit, Dickory continued, "There's one thing I don't like, and that's the men on board your ship." "What do you mean?" she asked, amazed. "Speak lower," he said, and, as he spoke, he thought himself that it might be well to hold out towards her a couple of bananas. "They're a bad, hard lot of men," he said. "I heard that from more than one person. You ought not stay on this ship." "And what do you know about it, Mr. Imprudence?" she asked with brows uplifted. "I suppose my father knows what's good for me." "But he's not here," said Dickory. Kate looked steadfastly at him. He did not seem as ruddy as he had been. And then she looked out upon the forward deck, and the thought came to her that when she had first noticed these men, it seemed to her that they were indeed a rough, hard lot. Kate Bonnet was a brave girl, but without knowing why, she felt a little frightened. "Your name is Dickory, isn't it?" she said. He looked up quickly, for it pleased him to hear her use his name. "Indeed it is," he answered. "Well, Dickory," she said, "I wish you would go and find Ben Greenway. I should like to have him with me until my father comes back." He turned and then stopped for an instant. He said in a clear voice, "I will go and get the shilling changed," and then he hurried away. He was gone a long time, and Kate could not understand it. Surely the Sarah Williams was not so big a ship that it would take all this time to look for Ben Greenway. But he did come back, and his face seemed even less ruddy than it was when she had last seen it. He came up close to her and began handling his fruit. "I don't want to frighten you," he said, "but I must tell you about things. I could not find Ben Greenway, and I asked one of the men about him, feigning that he owed me for some fruit. And the man looked at another man and laughed, and said that he had been sent for in a hurry and had gone ashore in a boat." "I cannot believe that," said Kate. "He would not go away and leave me." Dickory could not believe it either, and could offer no explanation. Kate now looked anxiously over the water towards the town, but no father was to be seen. "Now let me tell you what I found out," said Dickory. "You must know it. These men are wicked robbers. I slipped quietly among them to find out something, with my shilling in my hand, ready to ask somebody for change if I was noticed." "Well, what next?" laying her hand on his arm. "Oh, don't do that," he said quickly. "Better take hold of a banana. I spied that big Sam, who is the sailing master, and the black-headed fellow taking their ease behind some boxes smoking, and I listened with all sharpness. And Sam, he said to the other one, not in these words, but in a language not for you to hear, what he would like to do would be to get off on the next tide. And when the other fellow asked why he didn't go then and leave the fool, meaning your father, to go back to his farm, Big Sam answered, with a good many curses, that if he could do it, he would drop down the river that very minute, and wait at the bar until the water was high enough to cross, but that it was impossible, because they must not sail until your father had brought his cash box on board. It would be stupid to sail without that cash box. "Dickory," she said, "I'm frightened, and I want to go on shore. I want to see my father and tell him these things." "But there is no boat," said Dickory. "Every boat has left the ship." "But you have one," she said, looking over the side. "It's a poor little canoe," he answered, "and I'm afraid they would not let me take you away, I having no orders to do so." Kate was about to open her mouth to make an indignant reply when he exclaimed, "But here comes a boat from the town. Perhaps it's your father." She sprang to the rail. "No, it's not," she exclaimed. "It holds but one man, who rows." She stood without a word, watching the approaching boat, Dickory doing the same, but keeping himself out of the general view. The boat came alongside, and the oarsman handed up a note, which was presently brought to Kate by Big Sam, young Dickory Charter having in the meantime slipped below with his basket. "A note from your father, Mistress Bonnet," said the sailing master, and as she read it, he stood and looked upon her. "My father tells me," said Kate, speaking decidedly but quietly, "that he will come on board very soon, but I do not wish to wait for him. I will go back to the town. I have affairs which make it necessary for me to return immediately. Tell the man who brought the note that I will go back with him." Big Sam raised his eyebrows, and his face assumed a look of trouble. "It grieves me greatly, Mistress Bonnet," he said, "but the man is gone. He was ordered not to wait here." "Shout after him," cried Kate. "Call him back." Sam stepped to the rail and looked over the water. "He's too far away," he said, "but I'll try." And then he shouted, but the man paid no attention and kept rowing to shore. "I thought it was too far," he said, "but your father will be back soon. He sent that message to me. And now, fair mistress, what can we do for you? Shall it be that we send you some supper? Or, as your cabin is ready, would you prefer to step down to it and wait there for your father?" "No," she said. "I will wait here for my father. I want nothing." So with a bow he strode away, and presently Dickory came back. She drew near to him and whispered. "Dickory," she said, "what shall I do? Shall I scream and wave my handkerchief? Perhaps they may see and hear me from the town." "No," said Dickory, "I would not do that. The night is coming on and the sky is cloudy, and besides, if you make a noise, those fellows might do something." "Oh, Dickory, what shall I do?" "You must wait here for your father," he said. "He'll be here soon, and the moment you see him, call to him and make him take you to shore. You should both get away from this vessel as soon as you can." For a moment the girl reflected. "Dickory," she said, "I wish you would take a message for me to Master Martin Newcombe. He may be able to get here to me even before my father arrives." Dickory Charter knew Mr. Newcombe, and had heard what many people had talked about, that he was courting Major Bonnet's daughter. The day before, Dickory would not have cared who the young planter was courting, but this evening, even to his own surprise, he cared very much. He was intensely interested in Kate, and he did not desire to help Martin Newcombe to take an interest in her. Besides, he spoke honestly as he said, "And who would be here to take care of you? No, indeed, I will not leave you." "Then row to the town," she said, "and have a boat sent for me." He shook his head. "No," he said, "I will not leave you." Her eyes flashed. "You should do what you're commanded to." And in her excitement, she almost forgot to whisper. He shook his head and left her. This concludes the first part of The Pirate's Daughter. I'll be posting the next installment very soon. For now, continue to listen to the sounds of the fire and drift deeply into sleep.